our July 2021 board meeting. And joining me this evening my name is Rick Cruz, chair of the board, and joining me this evening are our vice chair, Leah Cruci, Naomi Shelton, Jim Sandman, and Ricardo Ganjam. Saba Barreda is unable to join us tonight, but has and will vote by proxy. So this evening, as we move through each agenda item, Brianni, our moderator for the evening, will unmute staff or individuals speaking on behalf of the school. We've disabled the hand raising feature, but individuals who previously signed up to testify will be called upon. And as a reminder, all written public comment is available to the public on our website. And if you didn't sign up in advance by sending your name to the public comment mailbox before this meeting, please submit any and all comments to public.comment@dcpcsb.org. Alternatively, you may use our public comment line to leave a voicemail testimony. That number is 202-328-2660, selecting option number 2. This is the time where we usually open up, and as always, open up to public witnesses who are signed up. This evening, we have no one signed up to testify. So if anyone does wish to offer comments, please make use of either the public comment line or public.comment@dcpcsb.org. All right. With that, we have a number of items that are being presented in our public hearing section, charter amendments. And before inviting Melody Sampson to kick us off, I would like to cede the floor to Dr. Walker Davis, our executive director, who wants to provide some context for several of the charter amendments.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz. Before my staff introduces the amendments, I would like to share our intent and position on virtual programming for the 2021-22 school year. The last year, as you know, has taught us many lessons and presented unique situations that we were working through in real time. We seek to continue to apply these lessons as school leaders prepare to fully reopen starting next month. One lesson that was perhaps the most poignant was the need both for consistency in terms of our overall expectations, as well as differentiation or flexibility to meet the specific needs of our communities. And this proved true not only in our urgent and real-time response to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also as we look to reimagine our overall approach to education. So to that end, for your consideration tonight is the opportunity for some schools to amend their charters to offer substantive, permanent virtual programming. To be clear, our goal is for every school to return to in-person learning as the primary mode of instruction. And we also want to be responsive to the questions and concerns that we've heard from families and schools that have inquired about continued virtual programming for a discrete subset of their populations. As you know, some charter LEAs are already authorized under their charter agreements to offer virtual programming, including schools that operate a separate online campus, schools that operate a virtual program within a non-virtual school, and 3 schools that have been granted a competency-based waiver that allows for virtual programming. Adult education schools may also offer virtual programming without a charter amendment. Specifically for the items before you tonight, we opened a charter amendment process only for schools wishing to offer substantive, permanent virtual programming separate and apart from their response to the pandemic, and it would fall under categories similar to what I've already mentioned. Further, if you were to approve any of the schools under consideration, you may also require those LEAs to track and report separately the outcomes for the students participating in permanent virtual programming so that the efficacy of the program can be monitored. So tonight you will hear directly from schools that wish to offer, again, substantive, permanent virtual programming, separate and apart from any response to the pandemic in the fall. And as you know, we will have a special meeting next week, Monday, July 26th, for you as a board to vote on these requests. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Melody Sampson to introduce the first request. Melody?
Hi, my name is Melody Sampson. I am a School Performance Department Senior Manager. Tonight, the board will hear from Apple Tree Early Childhood Public Charter School regarding its request to permanently offer virtual programming for a subset of its students. Starting in school year 21-22, Apple Tree Public Charter School proposes offering its Every Child Ready curriculum in a virtual environment for up to 20 pre-K 3 and pre-K 4 students. The students will engage in synchronous lessons for 30 to 60 minutes per day. They will also have asynchronous learning opportunities. Each student must have a caregiver who facilitates the child's learning. Apple Tree Public Charter School believes offering a virtual program will improve its ability to reach children whose families are reluctant to enroll their youngsters in school. Representatives from the school are here to answer any questions you have about their request.
Great, thank you, Melanie. Make sure we have everyone from Apple Tree. Brianna, if you can make sure that we have the Apple Tree team, and if you'd, Apple Tree team, if you'd introduce yourselves, and if you have any opening remarks before we open to questions from the board.
Yes, we have Siobhan Brown and Jamie Miles.
Yes. I had to take my virtual background off. I had a big spot in the middle of my face. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here. I am Jamie Miles. I'm the Executive Director and Chief of Schools for Apple Tree Early Learning Public Charter School. And I am joined this evening by Apple Tree's Chief of Research and Innovation, Ms. Siobhan Brown. We are very delighted to be with you this evening to seek your approval to amend our charter to offer a virtual program for the start of the 21-22 school year. As you know, because we've been before you a few times now, Apple Tree has been around for many years. We started in 2001 in Southwest DC, and we've grown and educated thousands of students and really prepared them to thrive in school, in kindergarten and beyond. This past school year, we all know was very unprecedented for many of us. In March 2020, we found ourselves quickly having to pivot and take our traditional education approach and launch it virtually to accommodate the needs of our students, teachers, and families. By far, I must admit, it was some of the hardest moments of our educational careers, making us sometimes even wonder if this was even possible. However, with time, we discovered it was not only possible, but it was also very insightful, and we had some new learnings as a result of it. Prior to the pandemic, we have always sort of tracked data to see what early childhood students are doing. Are they in school? Are they not in school? And in 2019, 28% of the 3-year-olds and 14% of the 4-year-olds did not attend district-sponsored pre-kindergarten programs. Some of these, of course, we know probably were attending private schools. However, Apple Tree believed that many of those families were not attending. They kept their students out of school simply because they believed their children were better served at home, or were unwilling to have their children leave from home for a significant amount of time. We saw this during our recruitment efforts. When we would speak to families, they would name and say that they felt their student was too young to attend real school. So they wanted to keep their student at home. Their child wasn't ready. We also saw it even after we enrolled families. We'll have families to come, and most of the students actually did pretty fine, but the moms or the dads or caretakers would cry, and it was very hard for them to separate from the young learner. And as a result, they would withdraw their student from the school. And then we sort of continue to see this trend now during the pandemic, as some parents are just hesitant to send their students to school for safety reasons. Apple Tree, as you know, is non-compulsory. We only serve those grades. And we believe that there will continue to be a percentage of parents and caregivers who, as they did pre-pandemic, choose not to send their children to school. We've thought about this for a lot, and how can we reach these children, and how can we persuade parents and caregivers to send them to school with us. But prior to the pandemic, we did not have much success. However, the pandemic did provide us with a possible answer. And what we did, we modified our Every Child Ready instructional model to serve our virtual students and allow us to deliver a quality in-home education during this period of time. And during this time, what we learned was that when families were engaged and teachers used the lessons outlined for them, our students made progress across all of our domains. That's our social emotional learning, math, literacy, language arts, and literacy. If approved, our virtual program, we're only asking for 20 students or less at this time. They will be assigned to a teacher and a teaching assistant and an implementation specialist who will monitor the quality of the implementation of instruction. Students in the virtual cohort will be required to have an adult who can serve as their co-teacher. We do emphasize that is very important, that there is an adult present to help facilitate learning at home and to serve as a co-teacher with our teachers who will be teaching virtually. As the co-teacher, the adult will be responsible for working with the student at home to engage them in learning. Students in the virtual cohort will participate in whole group, small group instruction throughout the week. Assessments will be administered in person. Students with special needs will receive their services virtually, or will have set days for in-person services if there's a need based on their disability. Home meals, technologies, and materials will be provided to the families. Our mission is to educate 3 and 4-year-old children so that they are ready to succeed in kindergarten. We believe we effectively accomplish this mission for those who already attend our schools in person. However, it is our belief that we're not able to reach a significant number of young students simply for the reasons I outlined earlier. A virtual option such as this that we're proposing would allow, we think, Appletree to educate these children. If this approach is approved and successful, we can expand it, and it will further increase the likelihood of providing all young children with a solid educational background by the time they reach kindergarten. So at this time, I will pause. Thank you again for this opportunity, and we are available to answer any questions that you have for us.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Miles. All right, board members, who would like to kick off our questions and remarks?
So I'd love to ask a little bit more about the adult at-home facilitator. I mean, thank you so much for describing the approach that you're taking at Appletree. With this at-home facilitator, how many hours per day will this facilitator devote to facilitation? And how does the teacher support the facilitator in this setting?
So one, start with training of just making sure that our families are, or the adult who's with the child is very familiar with our program. We would take them through understanding about the child's day, what their day looks like, the expectations from how to log in, how to log out, how to navigate any of the instructional programs that we'll be offering virtually, what's the expectation of when we are doing a particular activity, what their role in that facilitation of the learning at home would look like. We will make sure that those individuals are trained and supported. But our goal is to lead the instruction, but our students are young, so therefore it is important that an adult is there to, one, get them online. If they're not being as attentive as we would like for them to be, to re-engage them, to potentially hold up things that we may need to help with facilitating the lesson at home. If we're doing some hands-on STEM activities, making sure those materials are prepared there. There are always questions that our teachers have that they can ask of the students. There's also questions that our families can ask of the student when they're at home as well. The students would not be engaged in full hours of talking at a screen or talking to a teacher or working with a teacher. So during that time, the adult at home would be asked to go through some of the learning activities at home. It could be a nature walk. Again, our students are early childhood, so we really want them to use the environment in their home for learning. It could be practicing some number writing at home. It could be taking a picture or a snapshot of something that they can complete. It could be engaged in play with the adults. We do believe in play at Appletree, so it can be having a conversation with your child through play and being able to, or with the person you are watching, it may not be your child, but the adult with the student, engage and play with the student throughout. So being able to share those opportunities back with us and engage with the student and with us through that process.
So what will be the hours of the school day?
We will maintain our typical school hours. We will go from 9 until 3. We will provide our students, our families with a schedule. In that schedule, there will be, just like our traditional school day, everything from a recommended nap time, as well as for lunchtime. But also during that time, they will have morning activities, which would be our morning meeting. They'll have a read aloud that they'll engage in. And then throughout the week, they'll have the opportunity to have one-on-one small group or small group lessons facilitated by their teacher that may include them or a few peers in that lesson, as well as hands-on science lessons and writing lessons and other things.
Okay, great. And so how many hours per
Oh, I'm
day?
sorry, and the hours, I keep
Yeah,
thinking
do
the
you
hours.
expect that the caregiver might be involved?
Approximately about 3 hours. Siobhan, is that a good estimate of hours? Once we think about the time in there, I think it's about 3 hours
Thanks.
out of a
Thank
6
you.
hours. Okay, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation here. I was going to ask a question about where your estimate of demand and interest for this had come from, and you're able to speak to it, so I appreciate that. But I'm curious how you've engaged families and staff in developing this proposal as a solution for from what you understand about children who hadn't been enrolled in the schools and families' reticence to have enrolled them in in-person learning.
So starting first with our staff, I think it wasn't as much as engaging them into this process as much as it was engaging them in the virtual experience in general. What was working well, what wasn't working well, how can we improve upon what we were implementing in the space, listening to our teachers to modify our program accordingly, to make it more accommodating to the families' needs, as well as in somewhat listening to our families as well during the pandemic time of like what wasn't working. We need more small group time, or it was very difficult for my student to come on, get online first thing for a few minutes and then get back off. We prefer for them to stay online for a longer amount of time. So we use their feedback to really make the program more robust and more responsive to the families and more accommodating to the teachers and what they were facilitating during that time. And in terms of engaging families, just to sort of see their interest, it came informally through conversations that families were just having as they were enrolling this school year, asking the question, will you be offering a virtual option? And of course, as Dr. Walker Davis named at the beginning of this, our goal is for every single student to be back in the building. We want our families back in the building. However, there was some hesitancy there for safety reasons. Also came about as we were just out recruiting, talking to families, and this was actually pre-pandemic as well as during the pandemic, just naming that families, again, had interest. They were sort of working in pods. We learned that there were pods before that families were working in. And then during the pandemic, they created more pods, and they were interested in remaining with their pods, but they also wanted the opportunity to engage and learn and be provided with some guidance and instruction in their lessons and in their teaching at home with their student. And then the formal way of the survey, asking our families and asking our teachers, one, is this an option? And do you think this is something that we should invest in? Is it worth it? And we had about 63% of our staff members to say yes. And many had very successful and thought it's something we should continue to offer. And then with a very small subset of families, again, that's why we're only looking for a small number of seats here, who named that this would be something that they would be very interested in if there was an opportunity presented to them.
Thank you so much for all of your responses so far. This has been helpful to hear, but again, for this to be early childhood, it is interesting to hear how this will all work, and just wanted to get more thoughts from you in terms of, contrary to what research has told us about the appropriate, as far as age levels, how age appropriate is for children to be engaged in virtual learning, and what data or what have you seen that codifies your decision to decide to go about this path?
Yep. We have Siobhan Brown, our Chief of Research here, who can share some data and some insights that we've seen and some new learnings that we've discovered through this process. I believe, there she is.
Sure, happy to share. And I really, just to kind of frame my response, I really do wish there was a different title for what we're proposing, because the virtual learning, I really think sells it a little bit short. We are really trying to engage families in a cohort of early learning who are choosing not to send their child to an in-person educational experience, but who still want to belong to a school and to have access to high quality early learning materials. So in no way would we say it's developmentally appropriate for a 3 and 4-year-old to engage in full day virtual learning, like Jamie shared, from 9 to 3 p.m. That is not our goal. And if we found out that a family was approaching virtual learning in that way, we would certainly coach them into different developmentally appropriate practice. Our goal, as Jamie mentioned, is to really lift up the power of families as their child's first teacher and leverage family expertise in helping to differentiate their child's learning experience in their 3 and 4-year-old year. So just as Every Child Ready celebrates the teacher perspective and adapts based on what teachers say they need, we hope to create a model and an environment where a family's voice is lifted, and we're able to have an agile response and support families right where they are in terms of meeting the needs of the development of their child. In terms of what this would look like over the course of the day, we found that across all 4 domains, if children experienced at least 6 or more virtual small group lessons, which are short, I'm talking one-on-one or small group lessons that are 10 minutes or less, they experienced growth across math, social emotional learning, language, and literacy domains. But we know that there's an untold story there of what families were doing with the children offline. And so our goal is to provide opportunities to extend learning, extend play, and as Dr. Michelle Walker Davis mentioned at the very beginning, reimagine what this early learning experience could be with kind of an innovative model where the publisher and the school provider is actually learning and bringing family voice to the center and not giving families something to implement. Families will have a voice in helping to shape what this early learning experience will be.
Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, did you have a question?
I did. Sorry, I was unmuting myself. Can you describe what the day and the hours are like for in-person students?
Yes, our students arrive anywhere between, we have before care, so they can arrive as soon as 7 o'clock, but basically our school day begins at 8:45 with instruction. They will do, they come in, they have a breakfast time with their teacher, and then they go into whole group lesson, like a morning meeting. They will have some center time. During that center time, there will also be small group instruction happening in the mornings. They will continue to engage in their center time in a small group instruction, mixed in with a little bit of whole group instruction. Then after that, they will break for lunch or recess and lunch. And then they will go down for a nap for like an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending upon like an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes between preschool and pre-K. And then they come back up, they have a snack, as well as they'll engage again in some type of whole group instruction. And then they will go back into centers, where they're in the center time is when they're engaged with learning with their peers, and their teacher may be in and out of that time asking questions and engaging with them. As also we have a teacher who will be working with them doing small group instruction during that time. And then they will exit at the end of the day.
And what time is that?
3:15.
Okay. My understanding from your proposal is that you'll have between half an hour and an hour of synchronous virtual learning. Asynchronous learning at home will not be tracked. Is that right?
In terms of it not being tracked, it will be a part of the day in terms of they'll have assignments and things that we will ask for them to complete. For example, it could be where they're out walking with the family collecting leaves. Not the best example, but that could be an example of something that they would do. And then maybe that is part of the assignment that they will submit to us. So then they would like take a picture and could send that to us through that platform. So it will not be completely where we would not have any engagement with them, or we would not track that. We would know what those students are doing. We will guide them through activities that they should complete during that time. It will not be for the duration of the 6 hours, but they will have activities and things that they would need to complete during that time when they're not with us.
You'll be receiving the same dollar amount, $11,000, for the students who are in person for 6 hours a day, as you will for students who are getting half an hour to an hour of synchronous virtual instruction, and then with asynchronous at home instruction. What assurance can you give us that the students in the new program that the investment of $11,000 is going to be commensurate with what they get out of it? Frankly, that just seems like a mismatch to me.
Yeah. Great question. One, we know we will make sure they have the resources, from helping them set up their home environment, where of course we do that in the school anyway. We provide the desk, we provide the resources. We would do the same thing for our students at home. We will work with them to make sure they have a learning space that's conducive to their environment. We will also ensure they have all the resources and the materials that they need, from the technology, the physical iPad that they need to facilitate learning, in addition to any internet access they need to ensure that they have connectivity, all throughout. As I mentioned, all learning materials, all of their manipulatives, all the things that typically are shared across the board. Each student would have to have their own set of learning materials, their own set of books, things that we would typically have shared in the classroom, where we would only have to buy maybe one book for 3 or 4 students in the classroom because there's multiple students and we can rotate. This student would basically have their classroom set up for them within that learning environment, where we would not be sharing those resources in the same way that we'll be sharing those resources with students who would be in person. So learning materials, there are a lot of materials that have to be purchased for early childhood students to learn and engage, from the blocks, the manipulatives, as I mentioned, the learning centers that we will ask them to engage with, the blocks that we will ask students to build and create imaginary things and tell us about those things, from our STEM activities that our students would be participating in, from buying the balance scale to the balloons or whatever they may need, using those supplies. Again, things that are typically shared, and it will be at a lower cost with a smaller amount of students. There will be no sharing. We have to provide that full cost there, as well as, of course, we have the teacher who will be dedicated their time and their resources to continue to support the student as they would in person, in addition to all of our social worker needs, anything that family needs. We will likely, sort of based on what we're doing now, we deliver all meals to families. We will probably continue to deliver meals to families. They sign up for us. We will make sure those meals get to them so they do not have to come to us, and any other resources that we need to provide to the family.
And respectfully, Jamie, I would add that we're investing in families. And just as we are educating teachers in best practices in early education, we're investing in building that pedagogy for families, and so that they will internalize and have an understanding of developmentally appropriate practice and what it means to educate and extend learning on specific standards. And so really building capacity in our families is something that we take very seriously and plan to reimagine this upcoming school year.
Just naming that was an area where we definitely saw a need. Like, we realized the families were in the home and they were working with our students. So we need to invest the time and the resources to train them and support them to help us facilitate.
Thank you. Will you have eligibility criteria for participants in the virtual program, or will it simply be on request as anyone who wants it gets it?
It's open to all. However, you must have that adult who's present. You must have the adult that is present, who's willing to commit the time. Also, the understanding, as I named, the assessments that have to be in person, being able to do that and take part of that. You have to show up every day for all of our live sessions that we're doing, for the homework activities that we're doing. We're expecting our families, we will have that laid out for them so they fully know what the expectation of them is, so that they have to meet those expectations, and recognizing this is not let me sign up for virtual learning and put my child on a computer or walk away and let them watch TV all day. This is not what we are offering. We are engaging the family, we're engaging the student, we are engaging the adult. We are expecting both of them to be closely involved and engaged in this process. And if they're not able to make that commitment, or if they're not able to continue with that commitment, then we will offer them a seat to our in-person instruction, in-person classrooms.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. My follow-up question to Jim's question is around, we are in some of the other schools we'll be speaking with later, the eligibility criteria is really around the student. For this, it really seems like the eligibility criteria around the adult requires a lot of thought. And is there clarity? First, do you have confidence, and what evidence of really thoughtful and deep surveying of for parents or caregivers to understand what the full range of this commitment is, one, beyond anecdotal, and then two, is it a requirement that it's one caregiver per child? I know there's a reference to pods that could be formed, But from my own experience with a child who wasn't 3 during the pandemic, but will be, the engagement, is it families that would have to be trading off from day to day? Because that kind of commitment, this is like a job. And realistically, how many families would really be able to commit one person to be, whether it's over with one child or with multiple children, to have that kind of institutional knowledge for such a long period of time?
Yes, definitely. One, we ask for an adult. So that could be a mother and a father or a grandma, whomever is in the household, or there may be switching based on the needs, where it may not be one person who's consistent. But our goal is to, again, make sure that we invest in the family so that all are familiar and able to facilitate and be a participant in their child's education, but also naming those learning pods. We are perfectly fine if it's a small group with one adult who's in charge of that small group to help facilitate that learning opportunity with that students. That can be like 1 to 2 adults facilitating of 3 to 4 students or multiple children and engage them in learning through this process.
Jamie, if I could also add, a part of the family engagement piece will also be ensuring that families understand the role of the conditions and the learning environment. So a lot of our content has almost a Montessori inspired framework where children are provided with an environment to learn, such as high quality centers, and teachers are trained how to facilitate those centers in a way that doesn't interrupt, but extends play. And so families will also be provided that pedagogy where they can set up whatever room or environment their early learners are learning in, so that the child can also engage in play and be extended with facilitation, but not constantly. I'm picturing my own 3-year-old here in my house where I'm constantly kind of saying, okay, now do this, now let's do this. But this would be a piece that really extended the pedagogy and provided families with resources to extend learning through play in a really high quality way.
So Jim and Leah both asked the questions that were on my mind, but I'm just go a little bit deeper here. The application speaks to an interest both on the part of families, but also a part of the school of meeting a need that existed pre-pandemic. And if I could just ask, what was the thinking about a virtual option before the experience of the last 18 months?
I will start, and then I'll let Siobhan also talk as our curriculum developer and provider. But on the school side, it's interesting, you think about the pandemic and it's like all gloom and terrible things. But honestly, it was just one of those things where, as on the school side, just really sitting up and approaching and saying, can we do this? Is this possible? That was not at the forefront, to be very honest with you. It was more of like, what else can we do? And we've definitely explored options. We've heard of the learning pods before. So being able to invite those pods in just to have play dates or to learn more about what we do so they'll feel more comfortable bringing their child to school, or giving them a little bit of runway and putting the supports in place so that family who is really reluctant to bring their child to school or really reluctant to have their child remain at school, to really understand what we do to make them feel more comfortable. But honestly, going virtual was not the very first thought in our minds initially. However, Siobhan, I would love for you to speak through some of the thinking behind the curriculum and where it's been.
Sure. So as a model provider, Every Child Ready has been approached several times over the last 10 years of my tenure at Appletree with pods, both in DC and out of DC, asking if they could use these materials to support in-home learning. And at the time, it wasn't something that we had fully realized or had reimagined to provide to families. And so this last year, we were able to take our learnings and listen to teachers and families and reimagine the instructional model to be delivered in a virtual setting, so that families were provided with those high quality instructional materials. I will say that We do have a really strong push towards authentic and naturalistic assessment and data collection in this virtual setting, which feels very different for a lot of people who are operating high quality schools in DC because they're used to a traditional performance management framework where we're capturing skills and abilities. So something that pushed us this year was a more authentic way to capture what children are learning from a standards-based framework and incorporating more observational reports. So that's something that an innovation that we've been able to leverage over this last year of piloting this virtual instructional model.
One follow-on question. The choice for families pre and now post-pandemic, hopefully post-pandemic, is not as simple as no sort of structured early childhood program or a structured in-person childhood program. There's a lot of sort of options in between. How would you compare what you're proposing to offer virtually with the family engagement to the many other options that are available? Many of them, if not, many of them are comparably free. So other types of programs that families might take advantage of in the community.
Rick, are you referring to the free ed tech products?
Not so much the ed tech products, but libraries, community centers. Like I'm just trying to,
Sure.
there's a broad spectrum of programming that parents are more or less comfortable with and are and prevent less of a stark choice between no programming for students or the in-person sort of programming that you all have very capably offered for many years, and how you would see this on that sort of spectrum.
Yeah. Jamie, why don't I pause so that you respond first as chief of schools, but I have thoughts.
Well, I was going to toss to you, but to say I will start with just the adult and the teacher. Our teachers are trained and they're supported through this process from how to implement, monitoring the data, tracking data, to be able to thoughtfully engage with our families and to thoughtfully engage with our students. There are many programs out there, and as a mom of young learners, you can definitely pick up a program and you can do a program. But even as an educator, I found myself sometimes wondering, or even saying, can someone else do this for me versus me having to do it, or wondering, how can I do this? So one, just starting naming that you will have the adult who is available and accessible for you, just as if you were sitting in a real classroom to support you and help you navigate through the resources that are there. But in addition to that, I'll let Siobhan continue.
I would say that families, especially in DC, are so fortunate to have the choice to bundle or bundle what they want their child's educational experience to be. So in this case, if a child were to, or a family were to engage in this virtual learning co-taught play cohort, they could also layer on the virtual options that places like Smithsonian and Martha's Table and different places have layered on over this last year. We can continue to offer some of those virtual experiences, but the difference is the family has, for lack of a better word, a roadmap of early learning that we've been able to validate and prove works time and time again in Washington, D.C. with our in-person learning at Appletree. And so families will have that early learning progression and roadmap and the skills and the knowledge to be able to coach their child through those phases of development while also experiencing some of these virtual add-ons or in-person add-ons if they feel comfortable taking their child to the Smithsonian or different engagement. But the hope is that we can also have a dialogue with families and learn what they want and what they're experiencing, and then bring that back to the model and the early learning standards to help paint a cohesive picture and early learning experience for their child.
One last question. Given that you're proposing, and to borrow some of the language that Dr. Walker Davis used earlier, sort of a substantive, sort of permanent program, that presupposes wanting to go from 20 to a larger number over time, I believe. And what would need to, what do you think the broader market sort of interest, like what's the family's sort of larger sort of interest for a program like this? Is it on, we're talking hundreds of students that you might serve?
I don't know if we're 100% there yet to say hundreds of students. And I will say this through the informal data collections. I mean, we definitely have the formal data that we've collected from our families who are currently with us. We've had the informal connections that we've had with these families out and about in these learning pods, as well as who've asked the question, are there other options? Or not even asked the question, they just simply said, no, my child isn't ready. We've never had the opportunity to be able to offer them an alternative. We weren't positioned to be able to offer them that alternative. So definitely a lot of perspective and prospects out there, but something that we have not necessarily actively recruited and offered it to them because we were not positioned to do that. But just knowing in our informal data collection, this is why we're here now, we've definitely had enough interest to pique our interest, as well as enough interest from other families to say, I would like to experience this, but I would not like to necessarily come into the building to experience, not in those exact words, but would not like to come into the building to experience what you offer.
Thank you. Board members, other questions?
When we go through our charter application season, as you may know, we have a pretty rigorous process of estimating, having applicants estimate demand and understand how their budget stands up if demand falls short in practice. And you mentioned earlier, there's upfront costs, and the cost structure to be able to provide materials and such is not the same as it is for in-person. What if demand falls short of what you think it will?
From a student perspective, we're gonna, whether it's one student or two student, we still get the per pupil allocation. So we will continue to be able to provide those resources to our students. And then just for Appletree, in terms of how we always plan and we budget and we think thoughtfully about how we're spending our funds and our resources, we would be able to support to teachers providing that support to those families. The bulk of the expense, of course, will be a salaried employee to provide the instruction to our students. The next piece will be the resources and the supplies and materials, again, which will be covered by the per pupil allocations.
And I guess my last question, thank you for that, is have you considered piloting outside of this kind of initiative to estimate demand and to kind of refine how this would work in practice?
I think we have. Siobhan, you want to talk a little bit about any additional pilots that we've sort of thought about? I would say for one, we want to start small. While this is definitely not a pilot in the sense of these are students and we want them to be successful, we have the data thus far to show that it can work. But we also, while we can always grow, we do not want to come to the table with asking for 200 seats or 500 seats and having 500 students trying to engage in virtual learning. One name, and again, we know that this is a family experience and not just a student experience to make this successful. So in some ways, we are using this to continue to learn. We're not done. One thing at Appletree, one of our core values is continuous improvement. So this is not, oh, we wrapped it up, put a bow on it, and we're done with this. This is, we know what has been successful thus far. We want to engage our families. We want to engage our students. We want to engage our teachers. We want to do this, and we want to continue to listen, and we want to continue to grow, and we want to continue to change to make it even more robust. So that if you see us in a year from now, if we upon approval, if we get approved, we say, oh, well, there's the demand there, as well as these are the lessons learned, and this is how we see it working. We can go forth and ask for that increase with confidence because we have the data to support, and we learn so many lessons along the way.
Thank you.
board members, any additional questions for the Appletree team? Okay, Ms. Miles, Ms. Brown, thank you so much. As Dr. Walker Davis said earlier, we'll be voting on all of these amendments next week.
Thank you all
Thank you.
very, very much. Right here.
Melody, I'll turn it back over to you.
Tonight, the board will hear from Howard University Public Charter Middle School of Mathematics and Science regarding its request to permanently offer virtual programming for a subset of its students. Starting in school year 21-22, Howard University Public Charter School proposes offering the Summit Learning Model in a virtual environment for up to 40 students in grades 6 through 8. The school will require instructors to simultaneously educate in-person learners while teaching a small group of virtual learners. Howard University Public Charter School seeks this shift because it found some students thrived in a virtual setting. The school also sees this change as an opportunity to retain students and families who fear COVID-19. Representatives from the school are here to answer any questions you may have about this request.
Rick,
Yes.
I will be recusing myself from this discussion and will be going off camera.
Thank you, Naomi. All right, so Naomi Shelton is recused from this discussion and the vote. Thank you, Melody. And Brianna, do we have, I see Ms. Procope here. Will you be speaking on behalf of the school? Is anyone else joining you? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Corbett Houston
we
should be joining us also.
All right, let's just make sure.
Yes, I am here.
Yes, there he is there.
All right.
Excellent. Well, I'll turn it over to you for if you both introduce yourselves and any opening comments you have before we ask some questions.
Again, thank you to the board for taking some time to consider our request. Again, and I want to thank you, Dr. Walker Davis, because your remarks were spot on and exactly where we were thinking: consistency and differentiation and a reimagined approach to education. When March 13th hit 2020, I think everybody was a little bit shocked, but I think for our school, it was a shock, but we were not caught flat-footed. Our school has been sending technology home to students since 2005, always preparing them in case there was something that they needed to do at home. So when this occurred, our blended learning platform that we had been using for several years made it really easy for our teachers to easily transition. One of the things that we do know is that we understand our families, and like all charter schools in the city, we have students who are coming to us from every ward. And in some instances, we just have some families who felt like, traveling from 8 to 1 was a little bit more than they wanted to do and asked us, do you have a virtual option? On the flip side, we have some students, and if you remember your middle school years, you know how up and down they are. There were some students who just simply thrived at home. And so we wanted to make sure that we could offer that particular option to our students. Again, as all schools, our intent is for every student to come back and for us to have in-person learning. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we are reimagining our approach to education, and we're not abandoning the innovation that we've actually tried to perfect during the pandemic. Summit Learning has allowed us to really provide that true personalized learning experience to our students, and the same experience that our students would have in classroom, we're going to offer them at home. Corbett, did you want to add anything?
I think the one other piece that I would add is that we don't often talk about is our mentoring piece that we have. We have added a robust sort of a mentoring piece for our young people so that teachers are able to check in with students one-on-one, and it has worked tremendously well with our online, with our virtual platform since we've been in this pandemic. And we are actually bringing it back to the school so that we have some time throughout the day in the middle of the week to make sure we have touch points with our young people, as opposed to before it was only about 30 minutes, and we're going to have some more time with our young people throughout the week on Wednesdays.
Questions?
Thank you for your presentation and for your service to your school community through this very, very intense year plus. Can you share with us how you mentioned, Ms. Prokop, how for some students they thrived in a virtual setting over the last year? Can you elaborate on how, what kind of assessment results or other kinds of evidence to support that you found?
It's interesting. So we've had students come to the building and ask us, can we stay virtual? And I asked them why. And these are students who are socially awkward from a middle school perspective, may have been the victims of bullying, and bullying is such a hard thing to lay your finger on because you actually have to say, I'm being bullied. And usually you don't get that information until it's exploded. They've been more focused. And just being able to, I don't know, it's such a, if you even think about yourself in middle school when we didn't have any technology, and now middle school with technology is really totally amazing. And so they just felt, it's like I'm more secure because I don't have all of these other things kind of competing for my attention when I'm in class. And so we've actually had, I recently had a conversation with a parent who said, you know, I'm so excited because my child has all A's. And I said, well, we're looking forward to seeing her in the building. And she kind of didn't say anything. And I was like, what's the matter? And she said she would really rather be home. She said she focuses so much better and nobody's kind of talking to her. And she's that kid who just likes to be on their own. My comment was, you know, I know that there's some social aspects that are always really important. I said, you know, you can't be in a closet forever. Like you have to come and have conversations. And she said, no, I get that. She said she, you know, would like to be able to not be in school every day and maybe come in on, a, you know, if there was something going on. And I said, okay, well, we'll have to look into that. So it's really has so much to do with the age of the students and that developmental space that they're in, where in some cases it was just fine because I'm home. And then that thing that we really don't want to talk about is the students who are home because they're taking care of some family business. We've got parents who are working and students who are taking care of siblings, and it's not something that you ever want to talk about because it's a little bit scary, honestly, when you think about it. But those students were able to take care of that stuff. Parents were able to do what they needed to do, and the students did well as far as their academics were concerned. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay.
You did, thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation on the program and all that you've been doing in the past year. I did want to ask a little bit about the teacher experience and how are the teachers going to balance those who are instructing in person and virtual learners? Are they together or is there a separate approach? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So when we gave some thought to this, one of the things that Mr. Houston and I are really adamant about, we never forget that we were teachers and are teachers too. And so we try things out before we try and spring it on our staff members. And so what we moved to Microsoft Teams during the pandemic. And so our teachers were engaging with their students through Microsoft Teams. Then we got, and I don't know if you've ever seen them, I'm a tech geek, so I apologize in advance, but the OWL 360 cameras in the classroom. And so what happens is the teacher's laptop is connected to the screen in the classroom. And so the teacher can see the children who are at home and the children who are in the classroom. And so I tried at teaching, I said, let me teach a math lesson. I'm a math teacher. So I did this. And what the student at home is allowed to do is raise hand. And what the camera does is if you are the person speaking, it zeroes in on you. So whether you're here or whether you're in the classroom. And so it allows the teacher to not have to do anything really, but connect to the camera. And so the student at home has the same experience as the student who's in the classroom. They're just not in the classroom. And we tested this with our teachers when they came back. We had a hybrid model in January, and it worked pretty well.
So the students who are remote will be integrating in with us
Yes, ma'am.
in the classroom.
Yes, ma'am. And they'll have the same teacher. And for us, the goal of that was there's going to be a situation, I'm sure, where the parent's going to say, you know what, you need to go back to school. You're eating all the food, or whatever the situation is, right? So, and I know my grandson lives in North Carolina, and he was virtual, and he had a whole separate set of teachers. And then when they went back to school, he had a whole brand new set. And it was so disconcerting to him. And I said to myself, we are not doing that. And so the student will have the same teacher, same schedule, whether they're virtual or in person. And if they decide to come back into the classroom, it'll be very seamless because they'll just go right into the class they had at home.
Great, thank you. And so from the hybrid model that you were operating this spring, what kind of results or other evidence did you see to support that the students were thriving and doing academically as well, both on-site and remotely?
So, Corbett, why don't you speak a little to how Summit gathers that data?
Right. So what we saw was the young people that were in the building. A lot of times, the young people that came into the building, their averages in Summit on the platform was a lot higher than the averages of the young people that were at home, because we had multiple teachers in the building actually teaching and working with students to make sure that they got what they needed academically. And we also had staff in the building, our social workers and our counselors, to meet those socio-emotional needs. So it was an all hands on deck approach to make sure that we were providing what each student needed. And so that's pretty much how it happened.
And so just to add on to that, we virtually as well, those, like Corbett talked about, that mentoring piece, all those same touch points happened for the student who was virtual as well. So I guess to say, were they thriving? I think our school had the same results as most schools. We've had some slight slips or learning loss, and we're hoping that we can make all of that up. Of course, the students who were there were, somebody was constantly there. Virtual is going to be virtual. I mean, we can do as much as we can to continue to mentor and stay on the child to make sure that they're getting what they need. But there are factors virtually that are out of our control, of course. But we're going to control, our goal is to control the things that we can.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned several categories of students that did better with virtual learning or that you thought might do better. Do you have eligibility criteria for the new program? Is participation limited to the categories of students you identified that you think would do better? Or is the program open to anyone who wants to come up to the limit of 40 students?
It's open to anyone who wants to come up to that limit. It would be really difficult if a parent feels this is the best situation for their children. The thing we always tell parents is we're in this together. So what's going to be the best option for your child?
if I understood Mr. Houston's description of the summit research on the experience during the past year, it sounded to me as if students who were in person did better than students who weren't. So if this is going to be open to anyone, whether or not there are indications that they're likely to do better, do you have evidence that would indicate that virtual learning for the other students is as effective as in-person learning?
So my question to that would be, my answer rather, is I think that the evidence that we've seen so far nationally is that in person is always going to be better. At the same time, we have to really think about how we are reimagining education and how we are improving it. So we feel we've done a pretty good job from a virtual standpoint, but have those children done better than the students who were in person? No. And I don't think that there's a school that's going to be able to tell you that. But what we are going to do is, again, refine and continue to monitor as we have students who are at home and parents are not just arbitrarily picking it. So I see what your question is, can anybody get in? And maybe that's something that we investigate, that we really take a look at who is requesting. So for example, if we have a student that we know is struggling and we know would do better in the building and the parent is requesting a virtual option, then for us, that would be a conversation and say, you know what, mom, it's looking like, you know, reading is a difficult issue. Can you talk to us a little more about why you want Johnny to be virtual? Because we think they'd be better in the building. So to answer that question, I can't say to you what that's going to look like at this point. I can say that we are going to implement Summit with fidelity and continue to refine our program so that we can make it so that it does give better results as time goes by.
I just want to sort of double click on the particular question around the model that you're using of the simultaneous instruction, which from talking to many other teachers, they found very challenging. So I just love to understand perhaps other models or approaches that you might have considered. It seems like you had a lot of success with this model, but I just sort of other things you might have.
We considered also having another teacher in the room where the other teacher was, so there's one teacher, say I'm the math teacher and Mr. Houston is the other teacher in the room. And so he's looking at the students who are virtual. And the reason we weren't thrilled with that is it disconnects the student from the class. So the teacher's watching, the secondary teacher is watching, but the primary teacher is kind of teaching the class. And so just kind of connecting the student was really a challenge. In talking to our teachers, because we don't do anything unless they're on board. And we had a lot of conversations with them about, you know, what did you think this would look like? And they said, yeah, let's go. We want to make sure that we reach everyone. So they're kind of tech savvy people. So that could be have a lot to do with it.
Thank you. All right, another call for any questions from the board. All right, if not, I thank both of you for everything that you do and for joining us this evening. And again, we'll be voting on this next week.
Appreciate you. Take care.
Thank you. All right, Melody, hand it back to you.
Tonight, the board will hear from KIPP DC Public Charter School regarding its request to offer virtual programming for 280 pre-K 3 through 12th grade students in school year 21-22. The school seeks to transition its virtual program into a standalone online campus at the start of school year 22-23. Participants will engage in 2.5 hours of asynchronous instruction and practice, followed by 3 hours of synchronous instruction. KIPP DC Public Charter School seeks this shift to satisfy demand among families who have long expressed interest in virtual programming. Representatives from the school are here to answer any questions you may have about the request.
Great, thank you. I'll just note that Naomi Shelton is recused from KIPP as well, so she'll remain off screen. And I think I see all of our KIPP folks on board. So Susan, if you want to start maybe by having everyone introduce themselves, or you introduce them, and then would love to hear any opening remarks.
Great. Thank you, Melody, for your introduction. My name is Susan Scheffler. I am KIPP DC's founder and CEO, and I'm joined by 5 of my colleagues. Susan Toth, who's our Chief Academic Officer, Dane Anderson, our Chief Operating Officer, Jacques Patterson, Chief Community Engagement and Growth Officer, Ed Hahn, our Senior Managing Director of Data and Analytics, and Caitlin Maxwell, a former KIPP DC principal and currently our Director of Virtual Programming. As Melody said, we are here today to discuss and answer any questions about our application to amend our charter in 2 ways. 1, to provide virtual instruction for students who select that option in the upcoming school year with or without a medical exemption. And 2, to add a virtual campus to our charter starting in the school year 2022-23. I briefly want to share the rationale for this request. We wanted to continue a high quality virtual program for medically eligible students and meet the needs of currently enrolled students who have requested access to virtual learning as well. That said, we are strongly encouraging students to return in person. We expect and plan for the vast majority of KIPP DC students to learn in person 5 days a week. Our in-person learning is ready to begin in August for the first days of school. However, we also know that due to medical needs or life circumstances, a small subset of students will need instruction that is delivered virtually, and we want to be prepared for that as well. We've staffed the program to support the need, and we anticipate being able to support around 280 students this year. In the 2021-22 school year, our program will serve students who are medically eligible and students who opt in and meet our selection criteria, which we've shared that criteria with the board. Our program is inclusive, and the students who are medically eligible will have the same experiences as the students that opt in. Here's one real life situation that illustrates the need for the program. A family shared with us that their son is medically eligible for the program, but their daughter is not. And they believe that having both children in the virtual program will help reduce their family's exposure to COVID-19 and the risks that it carries. Looking beyond next year, beginning in 2022 and 23 school year, we want to open a standalone virtual school for our students in pre-K3 through 8th grade. We expect that a small portion of our families will continue to prefer virtual instruction after next school year, and we want students who receive instruction in this way to have a sense of belonging and all of the resources and support that a dedicated school can bring. At the high school level, last year, the board approved an alternative high school program for KIPP DC. We delayed its opening due to the pandemic, and we are now thinking about how that program can meet the needs of our students, specifically at the high school level, using hybrid and virtual instruction. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and we are here to answer any questions that you may have. Dane Anderson, our COO, will direct each question to the appropriate staff member.
Thanks, Susan. As she said, there's a few of us here tonight, so I'll play quarterback for any questions that come up, try to make sure we get it to the right person.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you all. All right, board, I will open it up for questions for the KIPP team.
I'll kick things off. Thank you for your presentation. It's nice to see everyone. And Susan, the last example was helpful because the question I had coming into this was where you estimate kind of, if there is an estimate of kind of clusters of demand by grade span. Some of the questions that we posed to the Apple Tree team earlier, I'd have for you as well, but I understand, I'm interested in hearing about estimated demand for early childhood and then follow up that with the very unique needs of kids at that developmental stage, but also want to hear how you're thinking about where demand may be for other grade levels.
Yeah, we have been working with families on this for the last few months. Caitlin Maxwell and Jacques Patterson are probably the two people who are closest to that. And so Caitlin, maybe we start with you and you can share some of the data on kind of demand and what we're seeing from families. And then Jacques, perhaps you can talk about, what you're hearing directly from parents and how that varies by grade band. So start with Caitlin.
Sure. So as part of the work of the design for our virtual program, I've spent a lot of the last couple of months speaking with families to hear about what are some of their unique needs during the pandemic and what do they see as their unique needs longer term. And currently, what we're looking at in terms of current demand, we've got 93 total students expressing interest in pre-K 3 through 8th grade. And just about half of those are on direct medical conditions. And then a handful more are on families who Susan mentioned are living with someone immunocompromised, where they really want to reduce risk. I know that Jacques in his role has been talking and has some really salient parent quotes to share. So I'll actually kick it quickly over to him.
Thank you, Caitlin, and I appreciate that. One thing that we did learn as we were out and about throughout this whole pandemic with our families is that it was a struggle. I mean, let's be honest, it was a struggle for a lot of families. Some families did very well, and some families it was a very big struggle. So we actually did a survey during March and April, and I want to give you some of those numbers first and foremost before I give you some of the quotes as well. 81% of our families found it easy to use distance learning technology. I think we did a great job in answering the call. 78% of our families were happy with the remote learning program at their student school. But then we also had some families, we have 47% of our families that selected unlikely, 14% of that not sure, and 33% who said they basically didn't like, they didn't want to send their kid back to school. And as we talk about equity, and I wanted to hit on that point more than anything, is that we want to make sure that we have quality learning for all of our kids, regardless of where they live and what they choose to learn by. We saw that our families really made a demand for this. And so let me give you some of the quotes that we had from some of the parents as we engaged them back in those months of March and April of this year, as we were ending the school year and really trying to find out how we wanted to address this request for this amendment to our charter. So one of the families said, I just, health-wise, I just need to make sure that my daughter is safe and that my family is safe. I have always loved KIPP's curriculum, so I love that they can get that same experience virtually and be safe, since we have been home in a virtual setting. The student I have had no episodes with their asthma, but when she was in person, she had to get her nebulizer regularly. So, you have a student that is going through that and what's happening at school. I also had a parent that said, I get to see exactly what is going on in the classroom. In a traditional setting, I don't get to see that when that's not happening. They're a very involved parent. I feel more connected and involved. I get to see where they excel and where they struggle. So we had a number of these. I have a few more, but we had a number of these, and that's how we engage families, and that's how we came to this decision of asking for this amendment.
And Leah, to circle back really quickly on the actual demand numbers, we currently have 43 families interested for our middle school program, so 5th grade through 8th grade, 36 students in our 1st through 4th grade band, and then 18 total in our ECE program. And if you want that by grade level, I can give it to you later too.
No, that's okay. Great. I was curious by grade band, but it sounds like there may be a lot of siblings across this.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in with a question that comes to mind, and board members will open up to other questions as well. Jacques, from what you shared, it sounds like this is being positioned as an offering for existing KIPP families who are looking for a virtual option that will be available to them over the long haul, like as a permanent option. Is that the correct understanding, that the families that you're looking to serve here are existing KIPP families?
And I'll let Dame, I believe, point that to the right person, but yes, that is the overall.
Sorry, I'm not used to having a concierge
quarterback, so to speak. But yes, but Rick, yes, that is.
Yeah, and it kind of varies by year. I can take this one too. This next year, yes, we are not backfilling for this next year, and we are telling all families that would be in this program that they will have an in-person seat. And so, next year, absolutely. Long term, as Dr. Walker Davis mentioned, this isn't just about the pandemic, and we're trying to be thoughtful about that. This is not a hearing to ask for an enrollment ceiling, but it is a hearing to talk about a long-term program. And we are committed to this as a long-term program. And so we know right now, because we're talking with our families, that there are KIPP families that are interested in this. And I imagine if we continue this long term, that there would be other families that would be interested in this too. But again, Jacques and Caitlin, you've been closest with families over the last month or two, but anything you would add?
All I would say is Rick, when as asking that question, is yes, when I'm out in the community and people are asking, yes, they want it for next year because they saw things that work for them, or they have a medical issue in which they want to be at KIPP, and they want to make sure that they can address that medical issue at home in a safe environment, but still get the same quality of education. But then there are families that I've engaged with, like, okay, Jacques, are you guys going to do this for long term? Can we have this because we really need this for our family? For other reasons, like you said, where one person may qualify and another person may not, but they have problems in their household. So there are families that really want to see this continue in perpetuity, and we want to be able to offer that if this first year works out really well for us and the demand continues to grow.
Thank you.
We asked some questions. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Thank you for the presentation. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the parental expectations. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're going to train parents to support their children in this virtual setting, and especially for those parents of pre-K3 and pre-K4, as we talked about earlier tonight? What are some of the precautions you're taking to prepare them?
Yep, we've turned to Caitlin a lot so far. I'm going to turn to her again here, and then also Susan Toth, who is our Chief Academic Officer. But let's start with Caitlin.
Sure. So in doing the research, we spoke with a bunch of people across the country. And one group was a specific group of virtual school leaders on the West Coast. And a big part of their program was this idea of parent professional development, to view parents as that at-home teacher, and to really arm parents with the what of their kids are learning, the why they're learning something, and the how they're learning it, so parents know how to best support their kids at home. Given that information, we knew that it would be a huge part of our program to do bi-weekly parent professional development. We haven't yet thought of like the fun, catchy name besides parent professional development, but we do want to view and treat our parents as teachers and have those as optional bi-weekly meetings that will be recorded for families if they can't attend live, and shared with them. And then we've also hired a specific role within our school called the Manager of Student Success. And that particular person will work with families directly to hear about any issues that they're having, whether it's accessing curriculum, technology issues, whatever, to problem solve with that family in a unique manner to make sure that parents are successful. And then Susan, did you want to chime in with anything else?
Well, I think what Caitlin's also speaking to is a sense of community and belonging for families. alongside their children. We know that when families are empowered and engaged and feel a strong sense of belonging, that their students will be more successful academically, and they will therefore be more engaged in school. And so I think this is a really cool and innovative element of our program, and definitely one component of what families will have the opportunity to participate in. I think we should also just back up a little bit and describe our virtual program for preschool students, because I think that will tell you a little bit more about what the role of a family member will be in that program. We know that preschool education is a hugely important part of laying a foundation for success in school and for lifelong learning, and see this virtual program truly as a bridge to in-person learning over the long haul. I think we should also just name that we've hired staff who have strong content knowledge and experience in pre-K, and who have also just learned a great deal over the last year in how to teach preschool in a virtual setting. And again, while we believe that in-person learning is the best learning space for preschool students, we do know that there will be a few families for whom a structured virtual program is the best option, either because of medical perspectives or family needs. So our program is set up to include a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous content throughout the day. Our students will learn in both small groups and individually with their learning coach. We've modified our Tools of the Mind program for a virtual setting, and students will still participate in that structured play that will emphasize executive functioning skills and self-regulation, as well as scaffolded writing. We also will continue to use the Waterford Learning Program for additional skill building, especially in reading. One of the other pieces that's really important is that there is that family involvement, and we expect families to be involved, especially probably more in the beginning, but as support with their children in terms of learning support, technical support, support for all that structured play and conversation and imagination that needs to take place in a preschool classroom. And I think that's where the professional development and the support group that we'll create in these sessions with families will be really important.
And then Liam, if I may add one more thing, a nuance that we've also made is around our attendance coordinators, which we normally used to have at our schools and everything, that used to just, when someone was absent and making sure that they're at school and everything. We've changed that into family liaisons, which will be outreaching and trying to have wraparound services. Because one thing we learned from COVID is that there are a lot of other things that come into play. And these new family liaisons will play an instrumental part as well. As far as you've heard Susan Toth talk about all the things that are going to be happening academic to make them feel part of the community, but also actually starting to reach out to families that really struggle sometimes through the pandemic and trying to be proactive about addressing some of the issues that may have, kind of stymied their ability to do their best. We'll also be doing that as well and working very closely with our families.
Thank you for your.
Did you have a question?
I do. I have a few questions. Thank you for your presentation. Your application on page 2 says let me find it. Print is kind of small on my screen. You say the remote program is open to all KIPP DC students, but provides a rigorous selection process to ensure students who enter into this program can thrive. Do you have any selection criteria? I don't see any here. And if not, can you describe how this rigorous selection process will work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is detailed in the application on page 4, but Caitlin Maxwell is also very familiar with that. And so she can talk you through that specifically, but we are working with families already using that criteria.
Yeah, so one thing I want to be clear is that virtual learning is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And in the last 18 months, many of our students have been successful and some were not, and we are very honest about that. Given the program design and research, we want to make sure that the students who choose our program have had some success with virtual learning in the past. And we also want to be able to serve every student at the same time, know how important it is to have a certain threshold. In next school year, the 2021-2022 school year, we expect our virtual program to serve our current KIPTC students who are medically eligible or who meet this selection criteria. The first is achieving a daily attendance rate greater than 90% for virtual instruction last school year. Second, maintaining academic progress during that virtual school year. And third, attending an in-depth enrollment meeting with the program's leadership to review expectations and program details, and to give families a chance to ask any questions they may have about the program. If the student is in high school, we are also going to work with their high school leadership team to receive support in opting into the program.
Do you have research or your own data that indicates that students across this grade span, pre-K 3 through 12, that for them virtual education is as effective as in-person learning?
I think we've learned a lot about that in the last year and a half. Susan Toth and Ed Hahn are the people that are closest to that. Susan, I'll start with you, but Ed may have a lot of the detail behind it.
Sure. I think there are a few ways that we know that our virtual program was effective. And again, I would say we have to look at effective on multiple levels and with multiple layers and through multiple lenses as we think about what the last year and a half has been for our students and for our families. First, our students grew academically. While this was a very challenging and unusual year, we used a combination of formative and summative assessment tools across the last year to make sure that we had lots of different ways of measuring student growth or lags. And there are certainly areas we know based on our data where we need to focus going into the next school year, including K2 literacy, which is an area that we are investing currently considerable resources of time, curriculum, and professional development for our staff. But there are some really positive highlights from our data that I'd love to share with you as just, again, a note that we saw some really positive and strong success. 76% of our middle school students made growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year in math. 75% of our third and fourth grade students increased mastery on our Common Core aligned assessments. And our first and second graders had an average performance of 80% on our end of unit Common Core aligned assessments, which puts them on par with students in previous years. I think there's another way that I would say we knew that our virtual program was effective. We administered, as Jacques said, a family survey. We administered several surveys across the year, but we administered a pretty hefty one in March and April. And there are a few data points that I want to pull out from that survey to share in addition that I think are especially pertinent as we think about how to build from some of the success and some of the areas of growth from last year in developing the program moving forward. So 78% of our families said that they were happy with the remote learning at their child's school. And that again was in March, which was a full calendar year later. And so we were pretty pleased with that. 95% of our families said that they are proud that their children attend KIPTC. 88% of our families felt that their teachers had built strong relationships with their children. And 84% believe that our curriculum is culturally relevant and affirming. I think that when you look at this whole picture, all of these data points in particular and these sentiments, this is a really great foundation from which to build and develop a really, really strong virtual program.
Thank you. The three eligibility criteria that you mentioned previously, I'm not seeing those in the application. Can you show me where they are?
Jim, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think I referred to the application. I was actually referring to the staff's write-up.
Okay.
It's on page 4 of the staff's write-up.
Okay. And one last question. If you know, if a medically eligible student has a medically eligible for an exemption from in-person learning, has a sibling whose in-person attendance will put the medically eligible student at risk, does the sibling qualify for a medical exception?
Caitlin, has this come up? I think we're speculating a little, and so I don't want to go too far down this path, because I think our understanding from OSSE is that it's actually the discretion of a physician. And so I don't want to pretend that any of us are physicians, but Caitlin, has this exact example come up?
It has, and currently, under current guidance, they are not eligible.
Thank you.
All right, another round of questions for Kip. Does anyone have any additional questions?
I'm just going to follow up and double down on the home environment where there may be multiple children who would be engaging in person. I don't think it's only my experience that my children behave differently with me than with other adults. And thinking about very young children who may need very hands-on engagement from a caregiver, but that same caregiver also needs to support the virtual learning of other children in the household. Through the pandemic, millions of families experienced this not terribly fun situation, but in a permanent environment, how do you envision supporting parents so that this is going to be every day, and this is not, we're all trying to just get through this kind of situation. What does that parent support or caregiver support look like so that the student is really getting the most rigorous and high value experience?
Caitlin and Susan, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll start off. I think, again, I keep going back to the research and conversations that I did for the program. But one really stood out where an online education college professor who just studies K-12 online education for kids talked about how important it is to address the emotional burden for parents of educating their children, and making sure that we provide a supportive environment for families to talk to each other, to work with each other, and to hear what's working at home when they do have multiple children. And so one thing that we have been really thoughtful in doing is making sure that we create some sort of community with families, whether it's every other month in-person optional activities where they can get together, but essentially creating a really broad support group for our parents that are in the program so they can share the best practices. Susan, did you want to add on?
Yeah, I can't emphasize how important these initial conversations are with families too, to help them understand what they're signing up for. And again, I think in this next few months, we want to be as responsive as we can to what we're seeing in student performance, in actual learning spaces and time. We do have staff dedicated to providing that on-site support. We will have a hub from which we operate so that families can come in and get resources as they need. I think we're also thinking about all the additional layers beyond, in addition to classroom learning, that will support families, things like all of the tech support you could imagine being available to them, books, resources, materials and manipulatives, nice, great ways and consistent ways students store materials. I mean, all of those organizational things that I think could drive families a little crazy if they were inventing on their own. I think we will make sure that we're providing just real clarity around some of those systems, because we've now practiced those over the last year or so. I think, other things like meal delivery service, some of the things that are just going to be that are challenging sometimes for families, we're going to make sure that those are all still available for our families too.
And one quick thing I'll add on a very technical note is that our schedule for pre-K3 through 8th grade follows the same. There is an asynchronous video block that students are engaging in, and then there's live classes in the afternoon. And so you can truly think of it as a living room school where a parent is monitoring their kids, but they're all engaging along the same schedule despite their grade levels. So we can have families sort of tuning into one segment of the day and really being able to focus on that. Everything down to a lunch break is also is aligned for those grades.
I think you can tell too that we're really passionate about this. And I think, you know, we just have so much deep respect and humility about how just complex and important this role of a family member is in this experience. And I think that will serve us really well as we continue to refine and get better at what we're doing.
I would just add kind of tactically too, I mentioned this earlier, we're also not backfilling next year. So all these students, you know, if and when they're comfortable, their family's comfortable, they will have a seat in a KIPP DC school. And so that will be a distinction next year too.
I have one more question about eligibility criteria. This criterion that the student must have maintained academic progress during school year 2021. How will you assess whether the student maintained academic progress?
Caitlin, you want to talk through, Caitlin and Susan?
Sure, I think that's essentially looking at a combination of, again, attendance, grades, and all the assessments that we've administered over the last year to make sure that, you know, a student who is in significant jeopardy of, you know, grade level loss is not due to any combination of those factors, that we're aware of that. And we understand that the family who's signing their child up understands some of those critical factors and what would be needed for them to be successful in a virtual environment if that's where we proceed to go.
Thank you.
All right, unless there are any last questions, I will thank the KIPP team. Appreciate always everything you guys do, especially as you're preparing for the new school year, and appreciate all that you shared with us this evening. We'll be voting on this next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Melody, we're going to welcome Naomi Shelton back, and I believe we have one more school you'll be talking to us about.
Tonight, the board will hear from Maya Angelou Public Charter School regarding its request to offer a hybrid learning model at its high school campus. Maya Angelou Public Charter School High School is an alternative school for Opportunity Youth. Under the proposed model, students will engage in virtual and in-person instruction. The number of hours each student spends in either environment will depend on their individual needs. Maya Angelou Public Charter School expects most students to continue learning in person, but it seeks flexibility to permit students to complete coursework virtually. The school says this approach will improve its ability to meet students' varying needs. Representatives from the school are here to answer any questions you may have about the request.
Thank you, Melody. All right, Maya Angelou team, if you take a moment to introduce yourselves, let's make sure we've got everyone. And then if you'd like to start with any opening remarks.
Sure, absolutely. Good evening, Mr. Cruz and Charter School Board members. I'm Clarice Mendoza Davis, and I currently serve as Chief Executive Officer of MAPCS and See Forever. And I'm joined by my colleague. I'll let her introduce herself this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing us to be here. My name is Azalea Spade, and I am the Chief of Schools for the Maya Angelou Schools and See Forever Foundation.
Great. So thank you so much for considering our application this evening. We just want to share a little bit of context for this particular request that is before you tonight. So actually, back in school year 2015-2016, our high school campus began its implementation of blended learning. That meant that teachers not only continued direct whole group instruction in our classrooms, but we also began utilizing several online learning platforms for daily teaching and learning, as well as academic intervention and credit recovery. And this particular approach allowed many students to engage in and complete coursework at their own pace, oftentimes off-site, and also oftentimes outside of the traditional school day in the evenings and on weekends. Since then, and long before the COVID-19 pandemic, while not explicitly outlined in our agreement with PCSB, our staff has created flexible, hybrid, and remote learning plans that have been integral to the academic success of our students in need of this type of flexibility in order to stay on track to graduation. Scenarios that prompted our school leadership to put these plans in place include students who were court involved with standing parole appointments or other court requirements in the middle of the school day or towards the end of the school day, students who were parents and without consistent childcare, students who were expecting a child or who had just given birth to a child, students with critical medical conditions and therefore needed an exemption, and students who were employed full-time because they were the only source of income for their families and oftentimes fully independent or actually unaccompanied. We're really grateful that PCSB has shown their support for Maya students facing these scenarios by certifying scholars for graduation who had a hybrid or a virtual learning plan in place. And so we're hoping that we can continue using this method that's worked well for these particular students. And Azalea and I are happy to answer any questions you have about this particular endeavor this evening.
Great, thank you to both of you. Board members, it's time for questions.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to better understand some of the key differences between the current blended learning model and the proposed hybrid model.
Sure, absolutely. I think the, well, one thing I think that certainly prompted this is that we are acutely aware of the mayor's executive order for all students in school 5 days a week and for the full day. You know, we certainly want to be in compliance with that, but also feel that based on our students' needs, we have a pretty strong and compelling case in place to make sure that we can continue to execute hybrid and or virtual learning for a small group of students. Now, as it pertains to your question, I think that for blended learning, the majority, so all of our students engage in blended learning and they are on campus with us. Most of our students, the majority of our students prior to the pandemic are on campus with us full-time, 5 days a week for the school day. And so pedagogically in the classroom, teachers are doing small group rotations. They are working individually with students one-on-one, while students are working on their own, on Edgenuity, on some of our other academic intervention platforms. And so that's sort of really the biggest difference, right? That blended learning implementation and our hybrid or virtual learning, we're using the same curriculum and academic and intervention and credit recovery applications. It's just a matter of synchronous versus asynchronous, if you will. Azalea, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, you covered it all.
Okay, great.
Thank you for your presentation. Can you share with us what kind of outcomes, assessment results, or other kinds of evidence that demonstrate that students have succeeded academically using virtual instruction?
Sure, absolutely. So we prepared for this presentation tonight to speak specifically to a cohort of students who had actually been totally disengaged and disconnected from school altogether. So we focused on these 6 students in particular because of their ability this year with the pandemic to engage in hybrid/virtual learning. 3 of them actually got back on track to graduation and graduated in June. The other 3 are on track to graduate next month in August. In that cohort of 6 students, 2 of them are parents of children, and we have 3 that are completely living on their own and independent from other family members. So I think, Leah, for us, of course, we have, as part of our charter goals, we're measuring academic growth in reading, in math, and in writing, but we are really trying to work to improve our ACGR and our graduation goal. And we actually, as I was checking in with Azalea and the team, we're still validating the data, but it looks that like for this past school year that we just ended, we will have actually met our ACGR goal, which is part of our charter goals. And we're really excited about that. And I think attribute part of that to the flexibility of hybrid/remote learning, and the barriers that it helped remove for some students, especially those facing the particular scenarios that we shared earlier.
Thank you.
Could you all describe how you've engaged your overall community, inclusive of teachers and families, and how they played a role in developing this proposal?
Sure. Azalea, you want to take that one?
Sure. At the height of, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, sorry. I have a 2-year-old in the background, so please bear with me. At the height of the pandemic, we surveyed all of our parents and we surveyed our students. And at that particular time, 60% of our students and families believed that they would benefit from continuing the hybrid model. So a combination of in-person or virtual learning. We also brought parents in to kind of see what we want. We brought parents in to hear from them exactly what kinds of supports they would want from us if their student remained hybrid during the upcoming school year. And so a lot of parents have some fear about their students coming back, but the majority of them were open to coming back. Although we had a small group of students who were very successful, specifically the ones that Dr. Mendoza mentioned, and they completely feel like being totally hybrid would work for them. And so as we met with teachers, we wanted to determine how can we help students still be successful if we remain in this hybrid space. Now, we're only seeking a very small percentage of our student body, about 30 students total is what we believe would benefit from being hybrid. And teachers felt like ensuring that they still have access to all of the academic programming, all of the curricular programming, all of the academic interventions, and our wraparound services would help them succeed as we continue in the hybrid model. Teachers also felt that they should be able to engage via Google Classroom, via office hours, via after school hours, if they had the opportunity to come and meet with teachers to get additional support. And so while it is not our endeavor to be completely remote, we understand that based on the needs of our students and what families have communicated to us, that this hybrid model would benefit a small group of our students, but our teachers are also on board to ensure that those students are not left behind, that they get everything that all of the other students who are in person every day would be receiving.
Naomi, we also submitted to the staff a letter from a parent who shared more about her daughter's experience, and her daughter does meet the criteria, some of the criteria that we shared earlier. And so she'll, if you're able to read that letter, I think that parent testimony was really powerful as well.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Melody's memo on page 2 says Maya Angelou PCS identifies situations in which it will permit students to complete all their coursework virtually. These situations include but are not limited to. And then there's a list of 6 specific situations in which students will be eligible to do their coursework entirely virtually. I like the specificity of the list very much. These are very clear eligibility criteria. But the introductory language, including but not limited to, suggests that might be kind of mushy. Do you intend to limit the eligibility criteria to those 6 things? Would you be comfortable limiting our approval to those 6 things? If there's more, can you specify it?
Sure. And Jim, I think we'll share a little bit more context. So both Azalea and I understand the high school intimately, because at some point we were serving as interim co-principals of the high school campus together, or separately were interim principals at that campus about 4 or 5 years ago. And I think sometimes we have had students who they themselves have voiced concern, or parents have voiced concern for student safety and safe passage to school. And so depending on a student's sort of situation out in the community, if they are involved in a community beef, if they are a target of other students, usually who are not a part of our learning community at Maya, parents have gotten together with our school team to figure out some type of hybrid approach to keep the student safe and prevent them from being a victim of violence. And so I think that's really the other scenario that we had in mind. We weren't quite sure if it would necessarily pass muster. And again, we've only had to do that for a very, very small, like less than 5 groups of students, but it's real. And that's what we've had happen in the past 5 years that Azalea and I have served on staff here. So that's the one other scenario that we're really talking about. Otherwise, we're comfortable with the criterion that we've listed.
Go ahead.
Sorry, if I may add just one other scenario. It hasn't happened in the last 2 years, but 3 years ago, we had a student who was the eldest of, I believe, 4 children. And during the school year, the mother became terminally ill and needed an immediate caretaker. And so we worked with that family to provide opportunity for the student to remain remote 1 or 2 days a week to support the parent. And the student will come in after school, will come in the morning, would pick up work, would sit with the teacher until unfortunately her mother did succumb to the medical challenges that she faced. And after a small period of time being away, the student was able to re-engage with us full time. Again, we haven't experienced that in the last 2 years, but that might be another scenario where we would have to work with a student and a family.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'd be more comfortable pinning down what the eligibility criteria are. I'm not comfortable writing a blank check, just saying, these things and whatever else comes along. If the board approves, I hope that you might be able to work things out with the staff to come up with definitions that encompass the situations that you're concerned about, so we can define the universe.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any further questions for the team from Maya Angelou?
Just one last question about the evidence that the staff feels they have to demonstrate that students have, over this course of time been successful academically. I know that you mentioned the letter from the parent, but if you have any other stories or anecdotes, that would be helpful to hear what has been working in this transitional phase.
Sure, I can add that we, as you all know, we serve opportunity youth. And so there are a small group of students, particularly some of our students who are exceptional learners, who really struggled pre-pandemic and of course during the pandemic. And so we were able to of course, continue to support our students with IEPs during the pandemic, but we could not do so without wraparound services. And what I mean by that is that we provided home visits to students. We sometimes allowed students to come in the building, of course, ensuring that everyone abided by social distancing, to provide them one-to-one tutoring or one-to-one academic support. Many of those students, although they struggled pre-pandemic, because things were tailored specifically to their needs during the middle of the pandemic with the virtual learning, they knew that they could reach out to a teacher on Zoom. They could reach out to a teacher by calling the school to set up an appointment. They could have a separate Zoom session with a teacher or a support staff member to really dig deep into whatever the academic challenges they were having at the time. And the one particular student that I have in mind is a student who, before the pandemic, really struggled emotionally to connect in school and remain engaged. The time that the student was able to spend virtually really allowed her to focus on the academics and apply a lot of the instruction and intervention that was afforded to her in this very one-on-one and focused setting. And so that particular student, I would say with a lot of support and prayer, was really able to make great use of this time that we were in the virtual setting, and actually graduated this past June. We have several students who experienced just the opportunity to kind of relax and work at a pace that was more comfortable for them. They were able to really take the instruction that was given by their teachers, grapple with it in a way, practice with it in a way, ask for help in a setting that was comfortable for them, and not as distracting as it can be sometimes in the school building. And so these are just small examples of how students were able to really move from a place of just existing to thriving in the middle of the pandemic academically. Now, again, we are only looking at a very small group of our students, and what I am sharing is specific to the small group of students who have succeeded. We know that it is best for all students to be in person 100% of the time, and that ultimately is what the majority of our program would look like. But we have had students who were very successful doing the hybrid model this year, and we want to make sure that we continue to afford that option to students who meet very specific and clear criteria. Does that answer your question, Naomi?
It does, to a certain extent. I also wanted to hear about some other academic outcomes. Sorry.
Okay, got it. So you want to specify a little more, or would you like? So what I can also share is that students who participated in our virtual learning or a hybrid model had a combination of course, the online learning platform that we offer, but then also teacher created independent study projects that they were able to do. Students who at times were not comfortable either presenting academically in class could record their presentation, send them into their teachers. Small group instruction absolutely took place in the blended learning model, where students were in breakout rooms with small groups and really able to grapple with the academics and then show mastery. We have seen that many of our students had increased their reading levels. And this year we saw an increase in our My Right writing goal. We saw more students really being able to show growth and improvement in the writing standards that we have set forth in our writing goal. And so we are excited because we may not have been able to provide as many students with the opportunity as we did this year, so that we could really see the type of student that would be successful with the virtual or the hybrid learning model. Does that answer your question about academic outcomes? Thank you.
All right. Well, Maya Angelou team, thank you for joining us this evening. Again, this will be something we'll be voting on at our meeting next Monday morning, and we'll look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right, we have one more item for the hearing. If I invite Neda Musa to come and speak to us about Digital Pioneers, and if we have the Digital Pioneers team here as well, we'd love for them to join us.
Thank you so much, Vic. I appreciate it. Hello, my name is Netta Musa. I'm a school performance department specialist. Tonight, the board will discuss Digital Pioneers Academy public charter schools request to include graduation requirements to existing charter. In December 2020, DC PCSB conditionally approved Digital Pioneers public charter schools request to expand to grades 9 through 12 and increase its enrollment ceiling from 360 to 840. Now that it has DC PCSB's approval to open a high school, Digital Pioneers Public Charter School proposes adding graduation requirements to its charter agreement. Under the proposed graduation requirements, students must earn a total of 26.5 credits to graduate. 2 of those credits must be in computer and science, and 2 credits must be in leadership development. Currently, in its 3rd year of operation, Digital Pioneers Public Charter School educates 337 students in grades 6 through 8 in Ward 6. The school's mission is to develop the next generation of innovators. We prepare students to meet or exceed the highest academic standards while cultivating the strength of character necessary to both graduate from 4-year colleges and thrive in the 21st century careers.
Thank you. And I see Ms. Ashton, who I believe has joined us every other meeting this year. So welcome again. Would you like to open up with some remarks? I'm sure the team has some questions for you.
Chairman Cruz, I was thinking the exact same thing. I think I'm a regular at these meetings. And I will actually start by saying, I have listened for this last 2 hours of the innovation and the thoroughness in terms of questioning around, this pandemic was so tough, but to hear these schools and the members of the board just ask these questions around how do we continue the learning in an innovative way is exactly what DPA is all about. Although we're not asking for any virtual learning, we just want to do the work that we set out to do over this last year. But I just have appreciated your questions, the presentations from schools, and just think, wow, what a great city we are in to even entertain these questions about what's best for kids and how to meet the needs of our students and families. So I just say thank you to the board and to staff for all that hard work virtually. Hopefully we're gonna get back in person and soon, even for these board meetings, but maybe not. Okay, sorry. So with that, DPA, as I think Nada said, our graduation requirements are consistent with our application. They are consistent with city requirements, our mission. They meet and exceed the graduation requirements for high school. And so we are just excited to continue this work and to develop the next generation of innovators. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, board members. I'll kick off with one question, which is, so these requirements are different from what was contemplated when you came before us asking for the expansion. Is that, or?
Yeah, we actually, when we did the expansion, we did not actually present graduation requirements.
Okay.
And so this is the first time that we actually have presented them as required by the policy.
Thank you for that clarification.
So I'll kick off with a question. Of course, my questions are always going to be related to engagement. Can you speak to any ways that your school community, inclusive of teachers and families and possibly students, played a role in addressing and creating these requirements?
Yeah, great question, Ms. Shelton. I think as we have done our whole expansion requests, we have consistently engaged our faculty, our parents, and our scholars. I think this specific one is around the leadership opportunities. That is something that our scholars have consistently said that they want to learn computer science, but they want to learn how to use computer science to do what they want to do. And so that is really a direct response to the feedback that we heard from our scholars. I think,
the other requirements are also very consistent. Like our scholars actually, you know, they love DPA, they love math, science, and computer science, but they really want a well-rounded experience. So everything, and when it comes to history and world language and electives, which are the city's requirements, that is exactly what they asked for. They have really pushed us, including our families, on making sure our scholars get a, you know, more typical high school experience in the context of making sure we keep computer science and we keep our community together. So that's really very much been the feedback. We could have, you know, come and said, no, our parents only wanted to study computer science and they really want to go into these tech industry and fields. But the feedback from our scholars and for our community is they really want this well-rounded experience that includes computer science.
Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you for this. It's nice to see you again, Ms. Ashton. Can you share with us, so what supports are in place to ensure that students are on track to graduate?
Yes, a great question. Primarily given this coming out of this pandemic. So you know, if you ask that question outside of the pandemic, I'd probably have something completely different. But now where we are thinking very intentionally about the 9th grade year. I think the staff has pushed us both when it comes to special education for our scholars that were not as engaged. I'm actually pretty proud that we had a 93% attendance for scholars participating in 3+ hours of live Zoom lessons. But when we pulled that data back, we saw that 60% were really engaged. And so for that 40% who were not really engaged or fully engaged, we're thinking through in the fall, like double math blocks, double ELA blocks, continue to offer the range of supports in terms of computer science and social studies. However, really making sure that when we come back, we are really doubling down on ELA and math is something that I think we maybe would have done in the pandemic, but as we've really thought about the 9th grade year being so pivotal, we really said, let's double down in terms of the double offerings in ELA and math while still making sure our scholars get a well-rounded experience. I think and then so you may ask, well, what if a scholar comes in at 10th grade or 11th grade? Because we will always take scholars even if they haven't been with us in 9th grade. And so we've thought, well, we still want to double down on the core content areas, and they will have elective course offerings instead of some required course offerings that are going to put them on track. So computer science will always be a staple, but being able to take 2 AP classes is something that we're really excited for, because we think that puts scholars on the path to college and career success. However, we really want to make sure that they meet the minimum requirements at any point that they've come in. And so doubling down upon entry, I would say, but then making sure that their other course offerings are electives so that they can have those opportunities for engagement are just a couple ways that we've thought about that.
And a question that we've asked you before, but it's at least a month later. How does enrollment look?
Enrollment looks really, really great for us. We are currently at 457 fully enrolled, meaning all of their paperwork. And we actually have and I heard this number today, I thought, oh my gosh, but it's 490 that we have actually extended offers to. There's about 10 but we haven't declined anyone because we just assume that some parents may not, maybe they will not come back, but maybe they just haven't really been, on their computer trying to complete re-enrollment forms. So right now we have 491 for our 480 spots that we have extended offers to. And we are doing everything between now and opening to make sure that enrollment forms are in and that we really are capturing the true intent of families. And so we feel like really excited in terms of enrollment, but we also anticipate that there'll be some change in the fall in terms of what parents' true intentions. We do intend to open 100% in person. We think that may mean some families make different choices. And so we're continuing to recruit and hope to have a wait list even going into the fall. Thank you.
Michelle, what does that enrollment number mean for the entering 9th grade class? Can you just break that down?
Yep, it's right now we have 124 9th graders who have been extended an offer and 118 who have completed their full enrollment. And our target was 120.
All right.
Yep.
Room to grow.
Just a little. But we do anticipate that families will make changes. We have scholars who are waitlist for other schools, and so it is moving. It's moving in the right direction. But we're continuing the outreach. We're continuing the engagement. We're just continue to get folks excited about being back in school in person, which I think is exciting, and lots of questions families have. So we're trying to work through that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, board members? Otherwise, we will say thank you to Ms. Ashton, and we'll be at the end of our hearing and ready to begin our meeting. So one more call for any questions. Otherwise, all right. And Dr. Walker Davis, we're voting on this not next Monday, or are we voting on this next Monday as well?
I'm going to ask someone on our staff to clarify the right date.
Because I know the other 4 we are voting on next Monday.
Yes, the 4 we are voting on. This is our normal process. So, but I will make sure that you know exactly when we're voting on.
Okay.
This is a part of our normal process. So we'll be voting on this on September.
In September.
Thank you, Neda.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Be safe. See you soon.
Thanks. Okay, we're going to roll right into our meeting. And if I could get a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda of the DC Public Charter School Board meeting of July 19th, 2021.
Second.
All right, I got a motion in a second. As you all know, we need to do a roll call vote. Ricardo Ganjum.
Aye.
Jim Sandman.
Aye.
Naomi Shelton.
Aye.
Leah Cruci.
Aye.
I have also an aye from Sapo Barreda in her proxy, and that is an aye from me. The motion passes. The agenda is approved, and I will now hand over to Erin Kupferberg to talk about our COVID-19 impact policy revision, which we are due to vote on this evening.
Yes, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Always feel like I round out your evenings. Hi, my name is Erin Kupferberg, and I am a school performance department senior manager. Tonight, I am asking you to vote on the COVID-19 impact policy. This board approved the original policy in May 2020 with the purpose of clarifying how DC PCSB staff will implement key policies and practices impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic in school year 2019-20. The policy was again revised in December 2020 to update how DC PCSB would implement key policies and practices in school year 2020-21. The revisions this time focus on 3 key areas. First, we stated the accountability data we will be collecting for school year 2020-21. This data includes high school measures and adult education growth and achievement data. Second, the COVID-19 impact provision is proposed for schools undergoing review and renewal in the next 2 years who are not currently meeting their goals due to a lack of data from these last 2 years. Third, DC PCSB is proposing how we will use transitional goals data to assess charter performance in reviews and renewals for school years 2021-22 and 2022-23 data. Noting that data for next year, school year 2021-22, will be used as baseline data, and we will start to evaluate charter school performance with data beginning in 2022-23. We are proposing to collect school administered growth data from all students in grades kindergarten through 8 and optional for high school grades, in addition to the data we have collected annually as part of our accountability system. We received 2 public comments, one submitted by a charter support organization and one from an LEA. The public comment details are outlined in the table attached to the memo. Based on public comment, we made the following adjustments. Transitional goals data will include the standard annual data collection to the greatest extent possible. For example, this will include state assessment data, attendance, and class scores. SAT and ACT results will be included as part of the high school, career, and college readiness measure instead of independent measures. And an additional policy clarifications were added. And now if you have any questions before the vote, I can answer those too.
Thank you, Erin. Board members, a lot of detail in here, a lot of work contained in this. I'll just note, I particularly appreciate, as we do with some of these more toothy policies, which are usually all the ones that you deal with, Erin, the mapping of the public comment alongside our response. Very, very helpful, certainly to us, but hopefully also to schools and others who are submitting the comments. So thank you for continuing that.
Erin, could you remind us how this fits into our ongoing work to revise and refresh our accountability framework?
I can. Thank you for that question. So we are coming out of a year last year where we did not collect any accountability data. And this year, as we know, we are collecting limited accountability data, particularly for to assess schools for their goals. This next 2 years, looking at as a bridge to get a baseline of data, as I said, for next year and start to be able to evaluate goals for all schools and reviews and renewals more thoroughly the year after. The accountability work has kicked off and is being designed, for lack of a better word, over the next 2 years. So the phase for this next year is identifying all the business rules for measures. And we will be using some of this data that we are collecting to help make those decisions. So we are making decisions, I don't want to say post-COVID, because I think we're still getting through this, but with data after, kind of this year and a half of lack of data versus making all of our decisions with data prior to the pandemic. And then that second year, as we have a pilot accountability framework after the 2022-23 school year, again, we will have another set of data to help us analyze it and confirm our proposal to the, on our accountability framework. So we're making all of our decisions based on data and information that we have as we transition into this new post-COVID world.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? I know we had an opportunity when this was opened up from a public hearing, and again, the public comment to the response is pretty well detailed, but this is one last opportunity for questions before I take us to vote. Erin, as always, the detail satisfies everyone's questions in advance. So if there aren't any questions, I will take a motion.
I move that we approve the revisions to the COVID-19 impact policy.
Second.
All right, got a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Leah Cruci,
Aye.
Jim Sandman,
Aye.
Ricardo Gandrum,
Aye.
Naomi Shelton.
Aye.
I have in Sapabratis proxy a vote to approve as well. So that's another aye, and then an aye from myself. The motion passes. Aaron and team, thank you for all the work on that.
Thank you very much.
All right. So then our next up is our consent calendar. Before I ask for a motion there, would any board member like to remove an item from the calendar for further discussion or state a recusal with respect to any item there for the record?
I have recusals for, I believe it's just one of the items for KIP DC.
All right. So there's recusal on that item. Perfect. Otherwise, so for the record, Naomi Shelton recused on KIP, and otherwise I will take a motion on the consent calendar.
I move to approve all items on the consent calendar.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Leah Cruci. Was that an aye, Leah? Sorry.
Yes. Aye.
Okay, aye. Thank you. Naomi Shelton.
Aye.
Jim Sandman.
Aye.
Ricardo Gandrum.
Aye.
We have a, thank you. We have an aye from Saba Burita as well on her proxy, and an aye from myself. All right, so consent calendar passes. I believe, so I'm trying to remember, we now do a separate vote, Dr. Walker Davis, on the KIP item. That's correct. Yes, I believe we do. So just to make sure that we've got all that covered. So just can I get a motion to approve the KIP DC related item in the consent calendar?
I move to approve.
Sir. I'm just late breaking update from our general counsel. The KIP item is no longer in the consent calendar. So Naomi Shelton, thank you. So never mind, we do not need to pull that out. All right then. So consent calendar is approved as is, and any new business at this point in the evening? Shockingly not. All right, then I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn the July 19th, 2021 board meeting.
Second.
Can I get a second? All right, motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Jim Sandman.
Aye.
Leah Cruci.
Aye.
Ricardo Gandrum.
Aye.
Naomi Shelton.
Aye.
An aye from me and an aye from Saba Burita as well. Thank you, board members. Enjoy the rest of July, and we'll see you later this summer.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Next
Bye.
week.
Yes,
Monday.
bye. That's right. Next Monday. Sorry.